Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. It is that time of the month. It is Fireside Chat with the infamous Cyber Matt Lee of PAX 8. Matt Lee, welcome to the show.
Man, 18 times later. That is a year and a half, best I understand this, of you and I down this endeavor. I think if I can count correctly, it is. I may not.
Because it is only that one time of the month. So I will say this. I think you've been on more than 4 Fireside Chat.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
At least one other time.
Other things too.
But still, I digress. For the audience listening, we've got some things in store that will take this beyond CIS Top 18, maybe some governance and physical and environmental. But more than that, I think we have to say that while the band could break up, because I thought about my own solo career, I learned real quickly that the audience says, no, CJ, we listen because of those that you bring on the show, not because you have the show. And that's fair. That's fair. If all I can do is be a facilitator to bringing in the best of the best, then so be it. I will continue to do that until I cannot find anybody that meets that criteria. Today, however, we are focused on CIS Control 18. Pen testing, penetration testing. This is probably the most controversial or control domain. And I'll shed some light a little bit for those listening, that anybody that's participating in the Trustmark program, that you filled out a survey, said to prioritize the control domains in a logical order in which you should go about satisfying those safeguards objectively. And lo and behold, there's been a more than a few who have said the first thing that we do is we do a penetration test.
Oh, no.
And I don't want to give that too much time on our show today, but I think it lends itself to some things that are misconstrued to begin with about what penetration testing actually is. Yeah. And some other things that I think we should talk about. But just to give sort of a broad overview, is to test the effectiveness and resiliency of enterprise assets through identifying and exploiting weaknesses in controls. And I want to be clear about this: exploiting, not just identifying,
not just finding them and hoping they're stable.
Like, hey, look, we should probably patch this, and simulating
the objectives of the actions of an attacker, like actually doing it, right? Like that's what we're talking about here.
And so there's a couple pieces that I want to point out to the listeners that may not know this, like pen testing of like, hey, I tried to brute force through the firewall. Fine, got it. Maybe web applications or some other things that you might do. But remember, this is not limited to just the technologies that show up on, a network scan. It also includes people and processes. Yeah, and I will tell you, just before we get into this, I had an opportunity before I came to CompTIA to bid on a pen test. And one of the things that I had to do as part of this RFP was it said, you will be asked to sign a waiver that you will not hold us responsible for loss of life or limb. And we're like, come again? So part of the pen test was that they wanted us to social engineer our way past the security to get into the building, a physical part of this pen test. And they had authorization, if they felt threatened, to shoot the aggressor. And I was like, we not bidding on this project. We out.
All right. So I want to start my little diatribe on this too, because, I've had 2 very prominent people come on and talk about why is 1818, right? And I have my beliefs, and I know why it's number 18, and it's also why it's 18. And back to your point, people shouldn't start with the pen test. So What's the pen test? It's testing stuff and confirm. And I like to say this in an analogy, okay? And then we'll come back to what I'm getting at. If you were doing a pen test, and let's just say you're pen testing your house, and those controls you've put in place are you lock the front door, windows are ubiquitously locked, you set an alarm, you have a shotgun and it's loaded, You have a dog, and the dog's been trained to bite things that don't look like you, right? You've done all those things. You have an alarm, it's monitored, you have cameras, they're off site and backed up. You have all these things. You have all of these layers, and you've done them well. Now, imagine you're somebody else and you have not locked the door. You leave your safe unlocked and have $1 million in cash and bearer bonds in it. Your dog's been crate kenneled forever and can't actually do anything but bark in a kennel. You haven't loaded the shotgun in 12 years. You've never locked the front door or windows and checked them. You don't set the alarm. You haven't paid the monitoring bill in years. You have no cameras. They don't even work. Either of those two scenarios, which one do you think you'll get the most value out of paying a criminal to tell you where your weaknesses are? You're going to get the most value out of the one where you've done all the work and all you're doing is finding the holes in your things. When you are doing a pen test and everything sucks and your doors aren't locked and your windows aren't locked and your doors aren't monitored and your alarm isn't set, you are wasting your money. You are pissing in a fan. Right? There's no benefit. I'm going to be like, yeah, I walked in the front door and then I stole it out of the safe. There's my write-up. Have a nice day. Right? Like, yeah. Anyways.
I was going to rob you at the bank, but I thought, no, I'll wait till you take it home.
Yeah. But the point I'm trying to make is I asked at one point, my belief is that you should only do pen testing after you've done the stuff in the beginning. That's why it's number 18. Right. John Strand said, no, it's 18 just because it wound up at 18. Phyllis Lee came on my show and very quickly said, no, and she should know because she's the head of controls. Right. But she said, no, we put it there because everything has to be done first before you test it. And so let's just make sure we understand that 18 has no IG1s. It is only IG2, and that means you've already been 1 through 18 minus a couple, 1 through 17 again, right? 1 through 18 yet again. Yeah. And now that means you're at least 30-something controls and so many safeguards in, 100-something safeguards in, just to get to this point where you finally have a safeguard in penetration testing. So just so everybody knows, why did
it's 148, by the way, if you were to just say 18 left out. But that's not IG2 and 3.
Yeah, I would say IG2 left out specifically, or 3, I just mean as I'm going through it. But your point being, to your point, this is to test those things and to simulate the objectives of an attacker. Yep. That's why it's so late. If we read 18.1, it says, have a pen testing program, comma, space. And you and I have been round and round on this comma, space.
Yeah.
Right? Appropriate to the size, comma, space, complexity, comma, space, and maturity, comma, space, of the enterprise. My point being is it's saying, like, establish a pen testing program that's appropriate to your size, complexity, and maturity. And in some cases, that means that maybe we're getting into discussing automated anyways, let's continue on.
I would like to highlight something, though, on this one. I think the maturity piece is the part that should give everybody pause. And the reason why I say that is when you get into this particular arena, you're involving third party. You're going to involve some third party, right? And I think that the interesting thing here is you may have gone through governance. Maybe you're struggling with good policy, good documentation. But one of the things that's really interesting about establishing a program is you have to define a scope that's appropriate to what you just talked about. The size of the organization, what's appropriate for the organization, and maturity. So like if you're not real sure, then you maybe should reconsider being ready to go down this path of having a penetration test performed against your organization.
Get me started on running an automated platform and then scanning something you don't even own, or tying it into some CNAME record that you have that's not actually an A record or something you have responsibility and rights to do that on.
Right. I mean, and then it's one that comes, just listing some like, hey, if you were to go say pen test Microsoft, because that's where your tenant sits, you may have a legal issue.
Depends on what you do.
Depending on what you do, right? But let's just say, like, if you're not defining the scope, then gloves are off, right? Like this is suddenly going down.
Help you set that scope when you're paying for it, obviously. But the point is, just to get in the controller, basically saying, have a program that's appropriate to your size, maturity, and complexity, and establish the scope, like such as network, what hosted services, what web applications, what APIs. The frequency, like how often am I going to do it? Is it once a year? Once every 3 months? Is it once every 12 years? Right? What are my limitations? Like, when can you do it? What needs to be excluded? Who's your point of contact? Like, who am I going to call when things go bad?
Right.
And then how do you remediate things that you find? And that's the key part, right? Like, just like when we talked about incident response, one of the big parts is coming back around and actually fixing it afterwards so you learn.
Are you just jumping through all the safeguards all at once?
Man, I'm just, you know me, I like to roll through them. I like to roll through them. But the point is 18.1, and actually, you know what, you call out a great point, Chris, because if we break down 18.1, you notice that a lot of CIS's safeguards, the 18.2, 3, 4, and 5s point back and make 18.1 better, stronger, faster. So like, I'll just share my screen for a sec for you and me, for those that are listening, sorry. Okay, but the point being is if you look at what you and I built together, right, with the working group, look at 18.2 is a parameter upon 18.1. 18.3 is a parameter upon 18.1. 18.4 is a parameter upon 18.1. 18.5 is a parameter upon 18.1. All of those mean to say they modify that pen testing program as we learn more and do more. It makes modifications to this, right? And so that's why when you see they've given you things to do, you aren't doing till later safeguards. Like you're not even learning them till later safeguards, but they've put them in the master set of controls there, right? So,
And I think that's a really important way of looking at it. It's you have to crawl before you walk, before you run. And I think that they've done a halfway decent job with
did you
18
just
of
set me up for a Nietzsche quote?
maybe.
Did you just set me up for a one doesn't simply fly into flying before one can fly? One must first to crawl, then walk, then run, then jump. Oh, it's perfect.
Oh
Thank
yeah,
you.
that's fair.
No, it's
I didn't
good.
think about
Good.
it at that level, but yeah,
Nailed it for me. Thank
absolutely.
you.
So
Nerd.
so you yeah, who's the nerd now?
Yeah,
I
right.
think you did a great job of setting the stage here. So you actually jumped at you kind of walked through the safeguards and I think it's important to hear that because it is somewhat fluid, right? Like it's not like you just dwell on one as you start to go through this because you're going to see how they build upon each other and the importance of them together as opposed to by themselves. And I think that's kind of different from a lot of the other controls where they do build upon each other, but like they can live in many cases on their
Yeah.
own, right? One
Yeah.
knows that DHCP logging by itself is important to do, even if you are not doing all the other safeguards in that control. There's value in it. And I
But this
think
control is
it
literally linear. Same thing with like 14,
absolutely,
very similar,
yes.
right? 15 is
And
very similar. And actually,
18.2,
yeah, continue.
yeah, no, 18.2, it takes from program and says this needs to be done periodically and
Well,
no less than annually, or yeah, at a
yeah.
minimum, no less than annually,
Well,
right?
and 18.2, right now you've got your first constraint placed on 8.1. Now you're at
Yep.
18.1. You're now saying no less than annually. But also, what it's saying is, hey, let's make sure your scope includes external pen testing. Well, what is external? External means stuff that's externally facing. And clear box, opaque box, enterprise reconnaissance must be done, environmental reconnaissance must be done so that it can use specialized skills and experience. Penetration testing requires specialized skills and experience, which means no, you cannot just buy a tool necessarily and do this. I'm
Well,
sorry,
it's not a button.
all you've automated pen testing platforms out there. There's still some layers of human ingenuity that you're not going to replicate. Now, I do believe that you might be able to replicate the bell curve, and based on someone's complexity and maturity, you might be able to argue that that's a viable method to go forward. That said, what they're going into here is talking about clear box and opaque box. If you're talking about a pen tester, the delineation is clear box means you've told me all these things, you've given me everything I need, you may have given me a credential into the environment, those type of things. Whereas opaque box is, I don't have anything. I don't have any information, I don't have any knowledge, I'm just going to start where I am and move forward.
I really like this one, the opaque versus clear, because maturity can help with this, right? So if I'm a relatively immature MSP, to say I'm opaque is okay, right? Because I can start asking questions that says, hey, I need to identify, and maybe this isn't the best way to start the process, but at least it's starting to help the MSP or whoever it is
Yeah.
understand some of the limitations that they might already be aware of, but it's giving some affirmation to it, like, hey,
But
you don't know everything about yourself, right? Like you don't know everything.
100%. Well, and what this is the OSINT safeguard, right? 18.2 says do your OSINT because it's the one that says external pen testing must, that's the must word, that's old orange one, must include enterprise and environmental reconnaissance. That's OSINT, that's open source intelligence, that's actual probing, those things to detect exploitable information or exploitable systems. So what's interesting is like I tell this to MSPs, and I'm actually doing this in my show next Wednesday. I'm just going to show them what I do to go find stuff.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to show them that I go to security trails and dig up the stuff about subdomains. I go look at your SPF record and see what you put in for IP addresses. I'm going to go see who answers those stupid questionnaires of my favorite color's blue and I love summer and my password summer123. Like,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, right? So 18.2 is the beginning of external pen tests. Then 18.3 says, hey, stupid, if you
Yeah.
find something, fix it. I just want to choke that this has to be a part of it. But
Well, I
like,
want to pause for a minute. I
for
need to
real.
pause here. I
Yeah.
think it's important to call out 18.5 at this point because 18.5 is a repetitive of 18.2, right? It's saying to do the same thing
Now
internally.
internally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason why I said that is because I think 18.3 and 18.4 obviously matter for both the external and the internal, even though they put the internal at the end. So I just wanted to call that out because I think
Do you
it's
have any guess
important.
as to why they put the internal at
I
the end?
have
'Cause
a pretty
I
good
got one.
idea because if they
Why?
can't get in to my organization, then the vulnerabilities that are inside becomes a whole lot less important.
Sure does. Sure does. Yeah, you're talking about that like assume compromise comes in later terms, right? So now when
Yes.
you're dealing with internal, you're like, okay, I'm gonna assume they're in and I'm gonna
Right.
deal with it. To your point, the better value in the greater good conversation is check from outside and make sure we can't get compromise from the outside,
Right.
right? But then you have to deal with people and compromisation of people. But the point being, 18.3 it says fix the crap you scanned. Fix the crap you found. If Matt found a way in, go fix it. Determine based on risk, based on priority, which one's going to go
But
first.
I go back to 18.1, Matt, because 18.1 talks about specifically size and complexity. Then it talks about how you're going to define your scope and the network and all of that. And it's like, okay, so we're now on 18.2. We're talking about external pen tests, and we exclude internal until we've gone through the other two safeguards. I'm not saying that I disagree with the logic behind it. I'm just saying, like, if I'm building my program correctly based on what I've been told and what I should be doing, then I shouldn't be waiting until after I've started doing some of
Well,
this in some respects.
I disagree
I know.
respectfully. And the only reason I'd say that is if you think about trying to build a maturity model, like some guy named Chris I know doing in truck,
Fair.
just say, I think that you actually have less work to do. Somebody's going to throw bricks at me for this.
It's much narrower
It's a
scope.
much narrower scope. It's the shit you put an external hole facing something that has very, very limited capabilities of configuration by comparison to all the
Yeah.
stupid shit you can do inside your domain. And so if you were to go look at a vulnerability report that came out of my findings of an external pen test, in fact, I'll do this as when I did my PNPT because I actually have my practical network penetration tester. It was a 6-day exam or 7-day exam. 5-day live, 2-day reporting. My external pen test of this company, the Pasta Mentors, it's been long enough now, they're not using that infrastructure. But the Pasta Mentors, my external report was only like 36 pages. My internal report was 165 pages. Like imagine which one of those two you get the most value out of from a return to
Sure.
reward, ease
Yeah.
to fix, get myself good at this from a path perspective. And that's why I actually surmise that fix it 18.3,
Yeah.
validate again after you fixed it 18.4, now broaden the shit out of your scope to all this internal stuff and learn all these things like, what do you mean my force function level's too low? That's what I need for ADFS. I'm gonna have to
So
work with this ADFS partner to get them. That's a much
right.
different world.
But what you
Uh,
just said, I think, is really important because it really says that as you work through these three safeguards, you need to reevaluate what you put together for your program because if you're
We're gonna
not
use it again
careful,
much broader. Yeah,
yeah,
true. Yeah,
well,
yeah.
or you didn't define well enough to whoever it is you're engaging with for the pen test, and internal type testing has started to happen, even though it may not have been clearly articulated as part of your program, or you over it's the disease or danger of using templates or defining your scope for a pen test or allowing a vendor to tell you we do these things and you're like cool awesome and you're doing all
Well,
five.
and let alone, so let's also dig into this. Like, think about the automated pen test and what is an internal pen test? An internal pen test assumes that I have an internal position. I
Yep.
am on some asset and have varying degrees of access based on that internal position.
And now you're working to move laterally and north
Or
south.
escalate, yeah, north
Yeah.
south, right? So in my TPM test and the Pasta Mentors, I gained access from an external webmail host. That webmail was Redcube. That Redcube host had a low privilege account on a machine that had an internal facing IP address, and so I now had access to the internal network with very limited privilege. To your point, an internal pen test is now me going, how did I get to domain admin and grow to the very top
Yeah.
and get access? And that took me 165 pages of stuff, most of which was me crying and trying stuff that didn't work. That said,
Mhm.
I'm a terrible hacker by comparison to some.
So it just took you longer,
And,
and you were
and
dedicated. You're a good hard worker, bee.
so bad. And in normal access, though, what do they normally do to simulate? Put this NUC, this Intel NUC, in your environment. Well, now they have a high privileged asset inside your environment. They can now do LLM&R poisoning, all kinds of stuff. And so they're simulating, but all pen testing says to do is simulate the actions of an attacker. So
Yeah.
I actually, Jason Slegg and I go round and round about this. You and I have gone round and round about this. I am a believer that the automated pen tests, if scoped well, if managed well, are of themselves okay. The problem becomes when you read that, normally, why does somebody do that? They do it to sell you something, to be like, oh, look how big this is. But when you actually, as a practitioner, have to go interpret what I have to do this, and let's say you run and go just turn up your 80 forest function level, and now you've broken some other methodology that you have to rely upon.
Yeah.
Like, you need to have the knowledge and capability to understand and interpret what you're seeing and make risk-based decisions and logical outcomes and paths. And so I just think that oftentimes we trivialize what that knowledge set is worth.
Yep.
Interpret this and determine. I mean, there's whole business models out there right now that are like, no, Matt, our job is we take the vulnerability and attack surface posture management, and we find that these three would be strung together, and the likelihood of those strung together, like, that's how much there's people trying to help you understand this, because we're not there as practitioners. We haven't steadily understood it. So
this gets into the probability of impact at that point for remediation, right? Like there are things that may be exploitable that are unrealistically going to happen in the wild.
And it's hard to understand that sometimes.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That is the point of why do you pay a pen tester? They go and do it. They show you they've done it. They tell you how to fix it. They don't go theoretical. And I think the problem is when you look at just a Nessus scan or even an attack simulation platform, most of them still don't give contextual understanding of things in a way that are that logical and linear. So,
sure.
All right. Anyways,
sorry. You almost put me to sleep there on that.
I know.
One.
I'm trying. But basically, go.
Clearly, we've gotten 18.3. I think we're pretty clear on remediate the findings from 18.2. Yeah. But I think 18.4, and this gets into the IG3. This is getting into, did what I implemented based on remediation, can I validate that the measures I've taken are actually working? And I think to some extent, this still involves, in many cases, the pen testing organization you probably hired because they're going to come back and help you with that. They're not pen testing again outside of those things that they found.
Yeah, and that is exactly right. You pay that hourly, they come back and do a recert. Now, I do believe, Chris, and I'm bullish on this. So validate security measures. What does that mean? That says, after I change this stuff, make sure it now stops it, detects it, whatever it is that you're looking for as your outcome.
Well, it says to detect it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it can stop it.
That's
the important thing here is,
did you see it?
Yeah, we know definitively that you put enough effort into breaking something, eventually it breaks.
This is why I'm actually bringing some credence to the automated platforms, and here's why. Literally, I've looked at, just in the last couple of days, 3 different platforms that have all taken an atomic red team type approach. If you look at what atomic red team is, for anybody that doesn't know, atomic red team gives you easy to execute modules that you can, it's by Red Canary, that you can go execute and see if your EDR, if your SIM, if your other things have detected that. There are platforms now, Chris, that are actually doing that in a closed loop fashion, meaning they will go detonate the payload in a Python methodology on that asset, and then they will go look at the SIM and the alert systems and see if binarily they detected things. So you're starting to see people actually take 18.4 and productize 18.4, at least to TTPs and certain emulatable things. I just think we're heading down a path where that's going to be more and more viable. And the efficacy of that, while not holistic, it's only 85-ish%, is high efficacy of that 85%. Like it's very repeatable.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that me having a pen test done needs to have that level of testing done, because if you run fill in the blank, I won't pick on anybody, but let's just say it's Sentinel-1, just as an example. If you're running it and I run it, and the atomic test has been run on yours and it doesn't detect it, then there's some questions that you might ask that says, why do I need to run it on my environment if we know that this is still exploitable on the other systems that have already been tested with the same configuration?
Right. But the point being, 18.4 says you need to test what you actually have said you fixed. And what I bring this back to a bit of my belief of why 18 exists. I believe a massive vacuum of governance, which this is Johnny foreshadowing into what governance conversations you and I are going to have. But I think in a vacuum of governance, 18 is the breath of the past begging to deliver governance, right? Because from the very beginning, I'm going to come in and break in and test your crap. After I find stuff, I'm going to expect you to fix it. And I'm going to then measure it after you fix it. This is governance by definition as a control by inspect what you expect. And
well, and to make it to simplify it, we talk about the technical piece, and it might be hard for someone to wrap their heads around governance in that context because we often think of governance as only being with people, but it doesn't exclude people or process from this test.
Governance is the will of the company, right?
That's right.
So if your will is to not have L-LMNR poisoning be exploitable, and that some bitch gets exploited and somebody pops a hash, then guess what? You have failed the governance of what you had expected.
Exactly. And so I think that comes back to measuring, to your point, being able to say, did this violate our will as a company?
Yeah. Did it work? Did we get what we expected? If I poured concrete and it doesn't do what concrete should do, and I'm a concrete company, I have failed the will of the company from a governance perspective of making a company that makes freaking concrete.
You might have some other problems now too.
Lots of bodies.
All right. We got one left. We touched on it a little bit.
We did.
Internal pen tests. And this one also follows the same logic of using clear or opaque as what we saw before. But I think this one is really interesting because we see a lot of this in what we really want to know about ourselves. Like, did I do a good job of creating things like least privilege? Are you able to take my CJ user profile and do things that you shouldn't be able to do with my user account? Those are things we really want to know in this day and age. And I think back to your point of what you said about why it comes later. If I were to go back 10 years, this probably wasn't as significant of a problem because the external gate to get into the environment was really the attack surface. Today, it's very different. They're coming in because we're all stupid, and a lot of our stuff does not live behind those four walls.
There's also things and elements. So one of the things you said there, attack surface. Let's just make sure we define this for people. Protect surface is everything you own. Traditionally, attack surface is what you choose to expose for attack, right? But there are elements of places of exposure that you have not exposed to the traditional sense of external. And what I mean by that is, what if Chris decides to steal everything from this company? Chris is a threat using internal means with access that you might want to test. Now, internal pen testing does usually conscribe of, hey, here's a privileged position. Let's see what you can do now that you've compromised that outer sweet shell. But what does internal pen testing mean in a future state? What I mean by that is, what happens when there's no hard external and juicy, sweet, soft center anymore? When everything is SaaS and identity and mostly external, we're all pretty much living in this new definition of external. What is an internal network? Well, that's identities, access, service privileges, right? Service principals, API access, like things that are not your traditional, I'll just put a box in the network. Where? Freaking Hardee's? I don't give a shit. I'm not talking to a domain controller anymore.
Right.
I'm talking to a cloud service, and through modern methodologies and HTTPS, much harder for you to emulate and take over TLS and all of those things. So the point being is like, what we call an internal pen test today, and if someone was trying to define it, would say, well, we're now on your VLAN, your not public IP space. That's what we mean by internal. How many IPs do you have?
Right.
In the future, it's going to be a very different statement of what that looks like. So just take it with a grain of salt that even external versus internal, you might have to change the way you think about those things as time goes forward and what that means. But today,
I agree.
It's very network centric.
Well, I think that takes us through pen testing. If you weren't overwhelmed by the idea of having a penetration done, I'm just going to say this. Don't be overwhelmed, and remember that you've gone through 17 controls, or at least I think it's 16 of the 17 prior controls to get to here. 15?
I guess by that point you would have gone 1 through 18, missing 18 and 16, and I think.
That's it.
13 doesn't have an IG1, if I remember correctly.
That's
Not
possibly
to do
true.
that live right now. I have a high suspicion it's accurate. But then,
Like
yeah, I'm pretty usually pretty close. But that said, yeah, 13.1 is an
Yeah, 13,
IG2.
16, 18 are not
That's
in
correct. So you
the
have only been through
IG1.
15 the first time, and then by the time you get to 18, you have at least hit an IG2 in every one of them, which means you're 18 and 15. So by the time you get there, you are 33 controls in, and however many safeguards that is encompassed at that point, nearing 100
Yeah,
ish.
that's fair.
Yeah. And
And
by
and
the
when I
time you're
think
getting to
about
pen testing, you ought to be damn mature, is the
yeah,
point
and
we're
I think
talking
about
about.
the 13 was network monitoring and defense is not included, but in
That's
Control
correct.
12 you do network infrastructure management, and there's some other
Configuration
areas.
and hardening and
Yeah, there's some other
management.
areas that you've done quite a bit of this to prepare. So like I'm not so certain that you would have to have hit 12 well, or sorry, 13 well to do a pen
Well,
test.
13.1 gives you a sim. So to do a pen test, they
True.
really want to know that you detect. That's the
That's
core
right.
element of
That's
it.
right.
So I know I'm totally a
Yeah.
nerd. We're
Yeah,
totally
no,
belaboring the
you're not
point.
you were
Sorry.
right. I think that I guess where I was going with this is there is logic behind an organization having a
Oh,
pen
yeah.
test that has high exposure, whether they know all the ins and outs of having gone through a framework or not.
And that is John Strand's argument, is that if you at least do it and you pay for enough hours for it to be valuable, because
Yep.
remember, pen tests are usually by the hour. I pay for
Yeah.
40 hours, I get a week worth of Matt's time, right? And so if you paid for enough hours and you were willing to take that as your exhaustive list of what you should work on from an external risk
It's definitely
perspective
a
first,
starting point.
love it. Agree.
Yeah.
Totally with you. John Strand gets points there, but that is not why it was prescribed. If you
Right.
are walking through the journey, it's probably not your best effort and investment. You'd be better off doing the basics.
Well, that's like going to the emergency room and it's
Right.
obvious that you're bleeding, but they're like, "Oh, and you have a cough. We should probably diagnose that first." Right? They're both present, right? Like, but you know
Yeah.
one is very
Probably
obvious
take
and you
the
need to
blood
take care
hole
of it.
first.
That's
Is
right. That's
the
right.
resource there, but I'm not.
Matt, as always, it's a pleasure. For those of you listening, this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks and have a great week.